Welcome, curious minds. As the new school year gets going, it's always full of promise, isn't it? New initiatives, fresh starts. Today, we're inviting you into what feels like a really thoughtful learning environment. We're doing a deep dive, unpacking the core ideas and the practical strategies inside the Pathways Newsletter 2025-26 Quarter 1. This comes from the Anaheim Union High School District, AUHSD. Our mission. It's really to pull out the key nuggets from this material, to show you how this one district is trying to build deep learning, real connections, and genuine accessibility for its students. Think of it as a shortcut to understanding the thinking behind these pathways. And right away, their big theme for the 2025-2026 school year jumps out. Language is the vehicle of thinking. That sounds, well, pretty profound. What does AUHSD really mean by that? Why make it the central theme?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's definitely more than just reading and writing. It really highlights how creating these learning spaces, places where students can actually use language to think, to connect, to express what's going on inside, is, well, fundamental. The newsletter argues pretty strongly, actually, that deep learning, the kind that sticks, it only really takes root when students feel seen, valued, and when they're invited to think beyond just the surface stuff. It's about empowering them to own their thinking through language.
Okay, so it's not just teaching vocabulary lists, it's teaching them how to use words to actually construct their thoughts. That feels like a significant focus. Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. First, big section in the newsletter, the instructional focus of the month. It's called Building Connections, Name, Need, Story. Sounds simple, maybe, but they frame it as this really intentional practice, especially for the start of the school year. What's the strategic thinking behind something like name, need, story at a district level? Why is it so important?
Well, it's critical, really, because that connection piece, it's the bedrock. It's the foundation for learning, especially, as the newsletter points out, for special ed teachers who might work with the same students for several years. Those relationships aren't just, nice. They actually build trust. They boost motivation. They create a sense of community. And that shapes a student's whole journey. The insight, I think, is that you just can't get to deep learning without deep connection first. It has to come first.
That makes complete sense. So can you break down the name, need, story parts for us?
Sure. So name, it's about that simple, but actually incredibly powerful act of learning and saying each student's name correctly. It sounds basic, but it immediately communicates respect, belonging, like, I see you,
right.
Then need. This is about digging a bit deeper, getting to know their needs, academic, sure, but also social, emotional, so they feel safe, supported, ready to actually take risks and learn. And finally, story. This is about taking the time, making the space to discover and really honor each student's background. Their cultural wealth, their strengths, their lived experiences. Every student brings this rich narrative, and acknowledging that is just key.
I can definitely see how that builds a foundation. But, thinking about the reality of a busy classroom, especially in a big district, what are maybe some of the hidden challenges in making this stick? Making it authentic for every teacher all year long, not just like the first week activity?
That's a really good question, and the newsletter kind of hints at it. The challenge is making it a consistent priority, right? It's easy for this stuff to become a checkbox exercise. Did name, need, story, first week, check. Yeah. But the real insight here is that this practice, when it's ongoing, it fundamentally shifts the classroom dynamic. It moves it from just transactional, like delivering content, to truly transformational, where a student's identity, their well-being, is seen as integral to their learning, not separate from it. And yeah, that requires ongoing support for teachers, professional development, maybe even a cultural shift, where relationship building isn't just nice, it's foundational to academic success.
Transformational, not transactional. I like that framing. And that actually leads us pretty smoothly into the next critical area, SPED law and IEP guidance. Specifically, the focus here is on making grade-level learning accessible for all students. The newsletter mentions an OSEP Dear Colleague letter from back in 2015. It clarified that IEP's individualized education programs have to align with state academic standards and the general ed curriculum. So this brings up a really important and often tricky question. How do you support a student who might be working, say, way below grade level, but still aim for that grade level content? How does that work in practice?
Right, and this is where the district's approach gets really interesting, I think. The core idea they're pushing is that IEP goals must connect to those grade level standards, even in those tough situations. They do this using something called core content connectors, CCCs, and also essential understandings.
Okay, core content connectors, essential understandings. Can you unpack those a bit?
Yeah, think of core content connectors as simplified,
Yeah.
foundational learning steps that are directly derived from the broader state standards. They're designed to make complex stuff accessible at different levels and essential understandings. Those are the big core ideas, the
Yeah.
absolute must-grasp concepts within a standard. So these tools help bridge that gap. They help teachers identify the most fundamental skills or ideas within a bigger, more complex standard that a student can access.
Okay, so it's not about lowering the bar or watering down the curriculum. It's more like finding a different ramp, a different pathway to get to the same core concepts.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. And the newsletter gives a really concrete example, which helps. Imagine you have an 8th grader. But in math, specifically in the functions domain, graphs and relationships, their proficiency is maybe closer to a 1st grade level. The 8th grade standard, the Common Core standard, it's about analyzing a graph and describing the relationship between two quantities qualitatively, like how one changes as the other changes.
Right, so big gap there. How do they possibly connect that 8th grade standard to a 1st grade level without it feeling totally disconnected or, frankly, pointless?
This is the clever part. They focus on the core content connector. For this standard, the CCC might be something like, use a graph to recognize which quantity is larger without counting. See how that simplifies it. The essential understanding is just recognizing more or less visually on a graph. So for this specific student, the annual IEP goal might be written something like this, verbatim from the example. Given a line graph that compares two related quantities, the student will determine which quantity is greater by pointing to or selecting the taller or higher part of the graph in 4 out of 5 opportunities with visual and verbal support.
Got it. So the goal still connects to the big idea of the 8th grade standard, analyzing a graph for relationships, but the specific action, the entry point, is tailored right to where that student is, pointing to the higher bar.
Exactly right. It's about breaking down that complex standard into its most fundamental, accessible piece.
That's a smart way to make sure the student is still engaging with the grade level concept, even if the task itself or the complexity is modified.
Precisely. And the access supports are crucial here. Things like using concrete objects or pictures instead of abstract graphs at first, or providing sentence frames, visual aids to help them respond. Simplifying the task itself, maybe removing extra numbers or complexity, while keeping that core concept comparing quantities on a graph. The big takeaway, the newsletter really emphasizes this, is that high-quality IEP goals are the primary tools for giving students access to grade-level thinking. They link the big ideas to the student's current entry point.
And they provide some pro tips for writing these strong IEP goals. What are those?
Yeah, 3 main things. First, always anchor the goal with those NCSC core content connectors or the essential understandings first. Start there.
Okay.
Second, scale the access, not the expectations, meaning use supports visuals, manipulative sentence starters, whatever it takes to create that pathway into the big idea. You're still aiming for the grade level concept, just with scaffolds.
Scale access, not expectations. I like that. And the third?
Third, write the goals in plain language. Simple, clear language so that everyone, the family, the student, if appropriate, all the staff actually understands what the target is. No jargon.
That seems incredibly important for collaboration. So what does this mean for you listening? It means that when IEP goals are designed this thoughtfully, they really can make grade-level learning accessible. They empower students. They let them engage with challenging ideas in a way that actually helps them make real progress. Okay, but having these great goals and philosophies is one thing. How does a district actually support teachers in implementing all this, the deep connection, the tailored access, and the day-to-day reality of the classroom? The newsletter points to some specific tools next in its ULS Corner. ULS stands for Unique Learning System. It also mentions Everway, which used to be N2Y. So how do these systems help make these ideas actionable? What's the practical side?
Yeah, these are essentially the practical backbone, the tools in the toolkit. The newsletter highlights quite a few new features and updates that seem really helpful. For instance, there's a new student activity report. This gives teachers a quick snapshot assignments, whether they're done, how the student performed. That's invaluable for tracking progress towards those specific IEP goals we were just talking about.
Right, connecting the data back to the goal. Makes sense. What about the learning content itself? Any updates there?
Absolutely. They've added new high school content semester, 2 units for biology, life science, U.S. history, world history, so expanding the curriculum reach. They've also updated the scope and sequences for ELA and math, including specific strands like applied math and geometry, keeping things current and comprehensive. Plus, there are tools to help with communication. A simple sticks board wizard to make creating communication boards easier. That's huge for nonverbal students or those with complex communication needs. And News to You, which is popular for current events, is getting upgrades too, like custom lesson plans and better access to past issues. These seem like really practical, teacher-friendly improvements.
Those do sound like significant updates, and they clearly align with that broader vision of access and tailored support. What about quick tips? Does the newsletter offer any advice for teachers using these tools, especially as the year starts?
It does. 3 quick tips for the first quarter. First, build routines around previewing language. Just spending a few minutes before an activity to go over high-frequency words, key vocabulary, it really boosts understanding and participation, especially for kids with language challenges.
Simple but effective.
Right.
What else?
Second, set students up for independence. Teach them explicitly how to log into their student dashboard, maybe using QR codes or their Google single sign-on, and how to navigate and complete digital assignments themselves, fostering that autonomy.
Right, empowering them.
And third, and this is an interesting distinction, they use the planner, not my plan. Essentially, they're encouraging teachers to use the system's planner feature to build out comprehensive learning pathways. These can auto-assign content across different subjects, making sure it's aligned and cohesive. It seems to be pushing beyond just planning individual lessons, which my plan might be used for, towards a more integrated, automated approach for students.
That sounds like a way to ensure consistency and alignment across the board. Very systematic. Okay, so we've talked connections, we've talked access through IEPs, we've talked practical tools. If we zoom out now and connect all of these pieces to the bigger picture, it seems clear these strategies are all rooted in the overarching AUHSD vision. To create a better world through unlimited use. That's a powerful statement. What does that vision really translate to in practice for them, based on this newsletter?
Well, that vision really does seem to drive everything we've discussed. The stated goal is to graduate students who are socially aware, civic-minded, life-ready. And they emphasize doing this by cultivating both soft and hard skills. So it's not just about academics, it's about developing the whole person, someone ready to contribute positively to the world.
And this vision is supported by some very clear core values. They call them the 5 C's and more. What are those core principles guiding the work?
Yeah, they list them out quite explicitly. First, you have the 5 C's: collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, communication, and compassion. Pretty standard, but essential 21st century skills, right?
Absolutely.
But then they add more layers. Second, a core belief that education works for students, not the other way around. That's a really strong student-centered statement. Third, they commit to an asset-based approach, focusing on the strengths within the community, within each student, rather than starting from a deficit mindset. Huge difference.
Yeah, that is a big shift.
Fourth, an explicit commitment to moving the needle toward equity and justice in education. Fifth, ensuring that the vision, the mission, the values, they're not just posters on a wall, they are delivered through instruction. That's where it happens.
So embedding it in the daily work.
Exactly. And sixth, the idea of working in systems, not silos, emphasizing that all these initiatives, all these departments need to be interconnected and working together cohesively.
Wow. It's actually really powerful when you lay it all out like that. You can genuinely see how those practical things we talked about earlier, the name, need, story, the approach to IEPs, the ULS tools, are direct expressions of these deeper values. It paints a picture of a really coherent, holistic educational philosophy driving the district. These values aren't just aspirational, they seem to be informing the actual work. Based on the newsletter, what would you say is the real test of whether these values are truly taking hold?
That's a great point. The newsletter implies, I think, that the true test is in the consistent implementation and ultimately the measurable impact on students. It's one thing to state these values. It's another thing entirely to see them reflected day in, day out in every classroom interaction, every IEP meeting, and how every student experiences school. It comes down to that daily commitment, building those connections, ensuring every single student, no matter their starting point, truly has that pathway to engage with meaningful grade-level thinking. That's the real work.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into what on the surface might look like just another district newsletter, what we've really uncovered is, I think, a pretty strategic and genuinely holistic approach to education. An approach focused intently on building deep connections first, then tailoring accessibility so every student can participate, and empowering all learners through clear communication and really robust tools. It's about building an environment where every student feels like they belong and has the chance to really thrive.
Absolutely. And it leaves us, and hopefully you listening, with a really interesting question to mull over. Considering this district's deep commitment to that idea of language as the vehicle of thinking and their very practical efforts to make learning genuinely accessible for everyone, how might applying these kinds of principles, connection, access, language for thinking, how might that reshape not just our schools, but really any environment where people are trying to learn, grow, and truly connect with each other?